What does a woman do when she crosses half the country for a promise, only to learn the man she came to marry was never real at all? The stagecoach rattled into Coldwater Springs as the afternoon sun sank toward the western hills. Dust drifted around the wheels, settling on the boots of the tired passengers who stepped down to stretch their aching legs. But one woman stayed seated, frozen in place, clutching a worn letter like it was the only steady thing left in her life. Lorene Pritchard held the envelope against her chest. Her gloved fingers traced its soft, overfolded edges. The ink had blurred in places from being touched too often. She whispered the name inside the letter, barely able to breathe. Clayton Merritt. She had repeated that name for 3 long weeks of travel from Pennsylvania. She had sacrificed the little she owned, slept upright in cramped stagecoaches, fed herself with the last bits of stale bread she had packed, and prayed every night that the man who'd written her such kind, hopeful words would be standing at the end of this road. "Ma'am, this here is Coldwater Springs," the driver called. Lorene forced herself to stand. Her dark blue dress was coated in prairie dust, her bonnet tilted slightly from the rough ride. She stepped down carefully and lifted her single carpet bag, the bag that held her entire life. The small frontier town stretched before her, a wide dirt street, plank sidewalks, buildings with faded signs, horses tied to posts, a few locals walking with their heads down against the heat. Nobody looked her way. Nobody cared that her entire future hung by a single name. She crossed the street toward the post office. Her boots kicked up dust with every step. Inside, the room smelled of oil lamps and old paper. The postmaster, an older man with wire spectacles, glanced up at her. "Help you, miss?" Lorene unfolded the precious letter with shaking hands. "I'm looking for directions to the homestead of Clayton Merritt." The postmaster frowned. He turned to a large ledger, flipped pages, ran his finger down long lists of names. Lorene's heart beat faster with every passing second. He flipped another page and then his face changed. "I've been postmaster here 11 years, he said gently. "I know every settler within 50 miles. There ain't no Clayton Merritt. Not here. Not anywhere near here. Never has been." The words hit her like a blow to the chest. That can't be," Lorene whispered. "We exchanged letters for months. He described his homestead, his land, his cabin by the creek. He promised." "I'm sorry, miss," the postmaster said softly. "Someone lied to you." Lied. Her knees buckled and she gripped the counter to stay upright. The room tilted, her breath caught in her throat. She had spent everything. She had no husband waiting for her, no home, no job, no one. Is there work?" she managed. "Or cheap lodging?" He scratched his jaw. "Work's scarce for a woman. Best I can suggest is the Hollister ranch up north. Big place. Owner rents out small cabins sometimes. 50 cents a week if he's in a good mood." Lorene nodded, barely hearing him. She thanked him, picked up her bag, and stepped outside. The sun was dipping lower now, shadows stretching across the dusty road. She had no horse, so she walked. Her feet throbbed with every step. Her shoulders ached from the weight of her bag. The dirt path climbed slowly uphill, winding between patches of dry grass and scattered cottonwoods. By the time she reached the ranch, she had sweat through her dress. She stopped to catch her breath. The Hollister place spread across the hillside like a small kingdom. A 2-story house with a wide porch. Barns and corrals. Chicken coops. 3 tiny cabins lined up behind the main house. And men. Ranch hands everywhere, hauling water, tending horses, repairing fences. Tools clanked. Horses whinnied. Chickens fussed. The place was alive with work. Then a voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. "I said the north fence, Deacon, not the east fence. You got eyes in your head or just empty sockets?" Lorene's head turned. A tall man stood near the main house, arms crossed, glaring at a young ranch hand. He was broad-shouldered, rough-edged, and sun-weathered. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong arms. A wide hat shaded a hard jaw and sharp eyes. This had to be Warren Hollister. When he finally turned and spotted her standing in the yard, dusty and desperate, his eyes narrowed. "You lost?" Lorene swallowed hard. His presence felt like standing too close to a thunderstorm. No, sir, I'm looking for lodging. The postmaster said you sometimes rent cabins. He looked her over from bonnet to boots, not kindly, not cruelly, just assessing. Cabins are for workers and long-term tenants. You passing through? I'm looking for work, sir, Lorraine said quietly. And a roof, just for a little while. What kind of work? Washing, mending, cooking, sewing. Anything honest. Got no need for house help, he said bluntly. Hope cracked inside her chest. She steadied herself. The cabin rent, sir. I can pay 50 cents a week. 75 for travelers. Her stomach dropped. That was nearly a third of the money she had left, but she nodded. I can pay it. He studied her a moment longer, his jaw tightening. Any family here? A husband? No, sir. Then what brings a woman this far from home with nothing but a carpet bag? Lorraine lifted her chin, guarding the last bit of pride she carried. That's my business, sir. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Maybe surprise. Maybe the smallest hint of respect. He finally turned toward the cabins. I'll show it to you. If it suits, you pay then. She followed him across the yard. Every ranch hand they passed slowed their work to stare. She felt the weight of their curiosity pressing on her shoulders. Warren stopped at the smallest cabin and opened the door. Inside was a rope bed, a small hearth, a washstand, and a single lantern hook. Simple. Bare, but dry. It's honest shelter, he said. Honest shelter. It was more than she'd had in days. It will do, sir. She handed him the coins. He pocketed them without counting. You're paid through Sunday. Rent again Monday morning. On time. I don't chase tenants. I won't make trouble, she promised. See that you don't. Quote. He tipped his hat, a faint, almost reluctant gesture of courtesy, and walked away. Lorraine stepped inside the cabin. The door closed behind her with a soft wooden thud. And in the silence of that tiny room, the truth finally broke through her fragile strength. Clayton Merritt was a lie. Her future was gone, her money almost gone, her dignity hanging by a thread, and the only shelter she had found was on the land of a man whose voice could cut through stone. Lorraine sank onto the rope bed and covered her face with her hands. Tears slipped through her fingers before she could stop them. Soft, shaking sobs filled the small cabin. No one in Coldwater Springs heard them, but even in her despair, she didn't know something yet. Her real story, the one she was meant to live, was about to begin. Sometimes a woman's life turns in the quiet moments, not the dramatic ones. For Lorraine, it was the small things that began to change her fate. Simple gestures, unexpected kindness, and the steady presence of the man whose voice could shake the whole ranch. The first days on the Hollister ranch passed slowly. Lorraine kept to herself, washing her few clothes, sweeping her little cabin, and trying to ignore the sting of the lie that had brought her west. Every morning she woke before dawn, braided her hair, and walked to the well for water. And every morning she saw Warren Hollister already awake, giving instructions to the ranch hands with that sharp voice that snapped through the quiet yard. He barely looked at her at first, but he always noticed her. Lorraine learned that quickly. On her fourth morning at the ranch, she went into town to look for work. She asked at the boarding house, the mercantile, the butcher shop, even the telegraph office. Everyone was kind, but nobody had a job. We've got our own wives for washing, one woman said politely. And not much extra work this far west, another explained. By noon, Lorraine had only 38 cents left. When she returned to the ranch, dusty and tired, she found the older woman from the middle cabin sweeping her porch. You're the new tenant, the woman said warmly. I'm Mavis Redmond. Quote. Lorraine liked her instantly. Mavis had kind eyes, gentle hands, and a motherly way of speaking. Are you settling in? Mavis asked. As well as I can, Lorraine answered softly. Mavis studied her with careful eyes. You've come a long way, sweetheart. You don't have to tell me why. Not yet. But you're not the first woman to arrive out here with more hope than money. Something inside Lorraine loosened. Maybe trust. Maybe relief. Mavis gave her simple advice. Where to find eggs cheap. which ranch hands were honest, and which tools Lorene could borrow from the barn. She even told her which days the ranch hands washed their shirts. That small bit of information planted an idea in Lorene's mind. That weekend, she heated water over the small hearth, borrowed a wash tub from Mavis, and offered to wash shirts for 5 cents each. By evening, she had earned her first 30 cents. It wasn't much, but it meant she could survive another week. As she hung the shirts on the clothesline, she heard heavy boots behind her. When she turned, Warren stood there, arms crossed, watching her quietly. "You planning to run a laundry business right under my nose?" he asked, his voice sharp. Lorene stiffened. "No, sir. I'm only trying to earn a little to pay my rent." He stepped closer, examined the shirts, then looked at her again. His face softened, only the smallest amount. "Make sure the men pay you," he said. "Some forget." "That's all, sir?" "That's all." He walked away, but not before she saw something flicker across his face, something that wasn't irritation at all, something like respect. And so the days fell into a rhythm. Lorene washed clothes, mended shirts, cooked simple meals in her cabin, and tried so hard not to draw Warren's attention. But attention found her anyway. One morning she accidentally walked into the wrong door, the small pantry attached to the main house, mistaking it for her cabin in the pale dawn light. Warren found her standing inside with a sack of flour in her hands. "You planning to steal my breakfast?" he barked. Lorene turned bright red. "No, sir." "I walked into the wrong door. It was dark." Quote. Warren stared at her long enough to make her squirm. Then, shockingly, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Next time you want flour," he said, "ask for it. Don't steal into my pantry like a midnight bandit." She hurried out, flustered, but she heard laughing behind her as the door closed. Another day she tried to gather eggs. A panicked hen flapped so wildly that Lorene tripped over a feed bucket, releasing half the chickens across the ranch. Ranch hands chased them in every direction as Warren watched with an expression she couldn't read. When she finally caught one, covered in dust and feathers, Warren lifted the hen from her hands. "You done causing mayhem?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she muttered. "Good." His eyes softened. "Because this place can't take much more of your troublemaking." There it was again, that small tug at the corner of his mouth. Almost a smile. Then came the moment that changed everything. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the yard gold, Warren approached Lorene while she was mending a tear in her dress. His voice was unusually quiet. "You any good at that?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I can sew almost anything." He handed her one of his shirts, the collar torn from the seam. "Fix this? 10 cents. Lorene blinked. 10 cents was more than she'd made in days. She nodded eagerly. By sundown, the shirt looked perfect. When Warren inspected her stitching, something new appeared on his face. Not pride, but something close to admiration. "This is good work," he said simply. It was the closest thing to praise she'd heard from him, and it warmed her more than the fire in her hearth ever could. Weeks passed. Lorene found steady mending work from the ranch hands. She earned enough to keep her cabin, buy eggs, and survive with dignity. Warren remained stern and distant, but she started noticing the cracks in his armor. He fixed the loose board on her cabin step without telling her. He made sure her firewood pile stayed full. He nodded to her every morning at the well. A small gesture, but more warmth than he showed most people. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her. One evening, as the sun set in soft orange light, Warren approached her cabin. His face was tighter than usual, his hands restless. "You've been here near a month," he said. "And I still don't know why a woman crossed half the country with nothing but a carpet bag." Lorene looked at her lap. She felt the truth rise like water in her chest. "I came to marry a man," she whispered. Warren stilled. "He promised me a home, a life. But when I arrived here, I found he didn't exist. None of it was real." Her voice broke. "I was foolish." Warren stepped closer. Not harsh, not cold, just honest. "You weren't foolish," he said quietly. "You were hopeful. That's a strength, Miss Pritchard, not a weakness." He said it so simply, so firmly, it broke something in her. Tears she had held for weeks slipped free. Warren reached out with a rough, careful hand and wiped one from her cheek. "Whoever lied to you was a coward," he said. "You deserved better." Quote. His thumb brushed her skin so gently she almost leaned into it, but he pulled his hand back a second later, clearing his throat as if the moment had gone too far. "If you need anything, you tell me," he said. "You ain't alone out here." And then he walked away. Lorene watched his retreating figure until he disappeared into the twilight. For the first time since she had arrived, she felt something new growing in her chest, something warm, steady, and terrifying. Hope. Some stories begin with heartbreak, others begin with hope. Lorene's began with both. And in the weeks that followed, something quiet and powerful took root between her and the man who never planned to let anyone close again. Life on the Hollister ranch settled into a gentle rhythm. Lorene worked hard every day, sewing shirts for the ranch hands and mending whatever needed fixing. Warren stayed busy with cattle, fences, and long days of work, but he noticed everything she did. He always had. One chilly morning, Lorene decided she needed firewood for the night. She had seen the ranch hands chop logs many times and thought she could manage. She set up a log behind her cabin, lifted the axe, and swung. The blade bounced off. She tried again, and again. The third swing finally cut through, but the force made her stumble backward, and the axe slipped from her hands. The blade nicked her palm. Lorene gasped and clutched her hand against her dress as blood gathered across her skin. She was still frozen in shock when a familiar voice cut through the quiet. "Miss Pritchard, what happened?" Warren's boots pounded across the yard. He reached her in seconds, eyes sharp with concern. When he saw the blood, his expression changed. Fear, anger, worry, all tangled together. "You should have asked for help," he said, his voice low but shaking. "You can't be out here hurting yourself." Before she could answer, he took her gently by the elbow and guided her inside her cabin. He poured clean water into her basin, knelt in front of her, and lifted her injured hand with surprising tenderness. "This will sting," he warned. She nodded. He cleaned the wound carefully, his rough hands steady and sure. Lorene watched him, his focused expression, the way he breathed slowly like he was afraid to hurt her. She felt a warmth she hadn't felt since arriving in Coldwater Springs. Not fear, not shame, safety. When he wrapped her palm with a clean strip of cloth, his fingertips brushed her wrist. Her pulse jumped. His eyes lifted to hers. "You've been doing everything alone since the day you got here," he said quietly. "You don't have to." Lorene's breath caught. "I didn't want to trouble anyone." "Trouble?" Warren let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "You're no trouble." He stood then, like he needed distance to steady himself. But before he reached the door, Lorene whispered, "Thank you." He paused, shoulders tense. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I look after what's mine." He stopped, realizing what he had said. Then he left, before she could ask what he meant. That evening he returned. He stood at her door at sunset, hat in his hands, looking strangely nervous for a man who ran an entire ranch. "You feel up for a walk?" he asked. Lorene nodded. They walked up the path toward the cottonwood tree that overlooked the whole valley. The breeze carried the smell of sage and grass. Neither of them spoke at first. Finally, Warren cleared his throat. "I ain't good with words," he said. "But there are things I need to say." Lorene waited, her heart trembling. "When my wife passed 3 years ago," he said, voice rough, "I thought my life was done. Thought nothing good could ever come again. I shut everyone out." He looked at her then, eyes filled with something deep and raw. "Then you came. Small as a sparrow, stubborn as a mule, and determined to survive. And somewhere along the way, you brought life back into this place." Lorene felt tears rise. "Warren." He stepped closer, not too close, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I care about you," he said simply. "More than I planned to, more than I wanted to, more than I ever expected to again." Lorene's breath caught. "I didn't come here looking for love," she whispered, But I found something better. I found a man who speaks rough but lives kind. A man who helped me stand again when I had nothing left." Quote, "He reached for her hand, careful of her bandage, and held it lightly, like he was afraid she might break. 'You deserve a home,' he said softly, 'a real one, and I want to give you that if you'll let me.'" Lorene felt her world shift gently and completely. "Yes," she whispered, "I'd like that, very much." The relief on Warren's face was something she would remember forever. He stepped even closer and slowly, carefully, placed a warm, steady kiss against her forehead. It was simple, tender, full of promise. Nothing urgent. Nothing rushed. Just a man beginning again, and a woman finally finding the place she belonged. From that night on, everything changed. Warren walked her home every evening, sat with her on her porch, brought her fresh eggs from the coop, checked her cabin roof before storms. The ranch hands noticed the change. Even Mavis smiled at them like she had known all along. One quiet evening, Warren knocked on her cabin door. When she opened it, he took off his hat, looked her square in the eyes, and spoke with a trembling seriousness she had never heard from him. "Lorene, I don't want to be just the man who rents you a cabin. I want to be the man who gives you a home. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes, happy ones, full ones. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." The relief and joy that washed over his face said everything. They married 2 weeks later beneath the cottonwood tree. It was simple, honest, perfect, Mavis cried. The ranch hands cheered, and Warren stood taller than she had ever seen him, proud and grateful. Lorene moved into the main house that night, leaving the tiny cabin behind. But she never forgot what it had given her, a beginning. Months passed, and the ranch grew stronger. So did the love between Lorene and Warren. They built a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the steady peace neither had known before. And one spring morning, Lorene held her newborn daughter in her arms, tiny, perfect, and wrapped in a handmade quilt. Warren sat beside her, his rough hand trembling as it gently stroked the baby's cheek. "She's beautiful," he whispered. Lorene smiled, tears filling her eyes. "We should give her a name full of hope." They named her Catherine Rose, the name of Warren's first love and the name of Lorene's new beginning, a name that carried the past and welcomed the future. Years passed. Their daughter grew. The ranch thrived, and every sunset, Lorene sat beside Warren on the porch of the home they built together, watching their children laugh and run through the yard. She had traveled across the country chasing a promise written in ink. Instead, she found something far better. She found a man who loved fiercely, lived honestly, and rebuilt his heart beside hers. Lorene squeezed Warren's hand as the evening sun painted the land gold. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For being the man at the end of the wrong journey." Warren pressed a kiss to her forehead, just like that first night. "And thank you," he murmured, "for bringing your journey to me." Quote, "They sat quietly, surrounded by the sounds of evening and the life they built, a life born not from perfection but from hope, courage, and a heart that finally found where it belonged."